While the opinion of some aliens in the Ben 10 franchise may vary for some, there is no doubt that the original 10 are considered incredibly iconic and among some of the most iconic aliens. Maybe it's just because of the fact they are the original 10, but each of these 10 aliens are really cool in their own ways. While some of them are considered the Mount Rushmore of aliens, particularly Heat Blast, Forearms, Diamond Head, or Accelerate, some of these aliens are swept under the rug as lesser aliens. While some of them still have a good chunk of fans, there is one alien that I absolutely adore that unfortunately is considered pretty forgettable in the fandom. That alien, as you guessed by the thumbnail and title, is Ripjaws. I was originally going to do a video about 5 aliens that I felt like fit this category, but after talking about one of those aliens that took about 20 minutes, I realized that this video would be incredibly long. Unless it's a tier list or a retrospective video, I didn't feel like making it go up to like an hour, so instead I figured I'd give each of those 5 aliens their own specific video. Starting, of course, with one of the original 10, Ripjaws. Despite the fact that I just mentioned I'm going to be doing 5 alien videos, they're not going to be all back to back. In fact, the next Ben 10 video after this I plan to do is not going to be about an Omnitrix alien, but instead about a Ben 10 character that I think deserves more respect and love in the franchise. But that's a story for another day. Out of every single classic series alien, I feel like Ripjaws is done the most dirty when it comes to general opinion. While there's a good chunk of people that absolutely love him, including yours truly, there's also a bunch of people that find him to be very useless and outright terrible. While Ripjaws does have his limits, I want to explain my thoughts on the alien, his appearances and how he's used, as well as potential that they could have had to make him a little more interesting, and to show off why Ripjaws I think deserves to be considered a loved alien, just like the other powerhouses in the original 10. Ripjaws is a Pisces Valan from Pisces, and would first appear in the episode The Kraken in the classic series. As far as Ripjaws' design goes, it's one of my favorite among the original 10. I've always loved aquatic designs, especially for aliens in the Ben 10 series, and Ripjaws is easily one of my favorites. I think my favorite part about him is obviously his jaw. I mean, that's kind of like his main thing. I love how crooked and like uneven all of his teeth are. One of my favorite things about Ripjaws is when he actually opens his mouth and we can see how much he can expand his jaw. I feel like the key word to really describe Ripjaws, and the word I'm probably going to use a lot in this video, is monstrous, because I just feel like that perfectly describes him. When he opens his jaw, it reminds me a lot of a basking shark, which probably was some inspiration for his jaw in the first place. I also love that instead of making it just one color with some lines, there's multiple shades of green to give some extra detail. I love his claws, his fins, I love the little scale details, the lines for his ribs and his neck. All that looks so good. I love his lifeless purple eyes too. Something about that makes him feel more monstrous. The single like little uniform patch is pretty neat, and his tail looks pretty cool as well. Ripjaws definitely has one of the more intricate designs of the original 10, and just remember that I said that because I'll be bringing up this point later on in the video. As far as abilities go, his main powers is that he can swim really fast, breathe underwater, and have jaws that can rip through solid steel. And although it sounds very simple, it actually leads to some pretty cool scenes. Ripjaws has some secondary abilities that I'll talk about later on in the video when appropriate, but for now, those are the main things you really need to know. As for Ripjaws' voice, he is voiced by Fred Tatasciore, which I hope I'm pronouncing right. Ripjaws has one of my favorite voices in the classic series. I think my favorite thing about how Ripjaws sounds in the classic series is how scary and like rough it sounds. Like you could tell that you gotta do something like with your throat or something to probably make that voice.
You wanna mess with a monster? Try me on for size. Okay, who's the punk giving us creatures a bad name? Who needs water when you've got jaws that can rip through steel? You gotta love room service.
Like seriously, this voice rocks, I love it. So Ripjaws has one of my favorite designs of the original 10, he has one of my favorite voices, and his power set's pretty neat. Can I say the same for his screen time and utilization, however? Since Ripjaws is one of the original 10 aliens, you would probably expect me to have a lot to talk about, as each of the original 10 have a lot of appearances and screen time. Ripjaws, however, is the exception to that. For some reason, Ripjaws has a very limited amount of appearances in the classic series. So we actually can talk about every single time he's used in the entire franchise. So let's start off with his debut in The Kraken. In The Kraken, Ripjaws is used at the end of the episode in order to save the Kraken's eggs from an evil poacher named Jonah Melville. Ripjaws has one of my favorite transformation sequences in the entire franchise. I love how detailed his face gets when he gets the Ripjaws features. I love how his hair becomes like the fin. I love how his teeth protrude. I also love the music and the sound effect they use for when Ripjaws is done transforming. The underwater fight scene in this episode is really fun. It has a lot of fast pacing and really cool action cinematography. One thing I feel like we never appreciate about Ripjaws that we'll see a little bit more of later on in the video is that Ripjaws is incredibly strong even when he's underwater, as he's able to swing a chain underwater. Maybe they should have Ripjaws as the next heir to the Belmont clan. Yeah, look at him go, just killing his own kind. Oh, how could you, Ripjaws? Although it is very brief, one of the first things that Ripjaws does that I really love is that he opens up his mouth to bite off an electrical wire. That is so cool. Like, look at how he looks, and tell me this doesn't look at least a little bit cool. As far as his debut scene goes, it's pretty good. It's got some action, and that's all you really need for a debut. So let's see if his future appearances can live up to the expectations of Ripjaws being really cool. His second appearance would be in the episode The Last Laugh, where he stops some crooks at the pier in the opening of the episode. A few things to highlight for this scene is one, we get to see Ripjaws' eyes glow under the water. I don't even care if they're the wrong color, it just looks really cool. Another thing is that when he snatches one of the crooks into the water, I love how like whippy the animation is, but also the fact that it kind of gives like a horror movie vibe, which given the episode The Last Laugh and the theme of the episode, I feel like that was intentional to be like correlating with each other, like to keep the theme the same. I'm probably like thinking too hard on that, but I don't know, if it was intentional, it's pretty cool. Another notable moment is when Ripjaws is cornered in a ring of fire. With some crafty thinking, Ripjaws is able to get a one-up on the crook and save the day. Look at the way he bites the crook and shakes him around for a bit. Like, could you imagine this happening to you in real life? I would piss like 4 different colors and probably scream for my mother in 5 languages. His final appearance in season 1 would be in the episode Secrets, where Ben turns into Ripjaws out of his control due to the malfunctioning of the Omnitrix. Which, by the way, I'll go more into this in the retrospective, but I always have a theory that this malfunction was supposed to be the randomizer mode we see in Omniverse, but it's just, you know, there was no voice for the Omnitrix in Classic, so I always theorized this was the randomizer mode. Anyway, in this episode, Ripjaws climbs Mount Rushmore for a bit, he gets really tired, and then he almost dies, but is saved because he turns into Accelerate at the last second. So he doesn't really get to do much anything here. Now, you may be wondering, only 3 episodes in season 1 and he doesn't do too much? That kinda sucks. But you can argue same thing for Diamond Head, one of the most popular aliens, because he only had 3 episodes in season 1 as well. However, comparatively, of course, Diamond Head does do a little more significant stuff. Despite this, Ripjaws still showed off some promise, so let's see if season 2 can show some of that promise into fruition. In the first episode of season 2, Truth, Ripjaws is the first alien used. This scene isn't really action-packed or anything, but the scene is a little funny. Ripjaws ends up having a bit of a scuffle with a havoc beast, and hijinks ensues. It's some silly shit. But I'll be honest, this scene of Ripjaws laughing, one of my absolute favorite things about Ripjaws. I don't know, something about it always cracks me up. Ripjaws is one of the aliens used in the little montage in the episode The Big Tick, where Ben tries to destroy the tick with every alien he has with the exception of Cannibal or Grey Matter. Things start really getting good when Ripjaws is used in the episode They Lurk Below. Ripjaws is used in the middle of the episode to fight underwater against alien cyber squids, and this is where I feel like Ripjaws' potential really shines. Every time I've gushed over this scene, I've always said it in such a testosterone way, like, oh my god, it's so cool, holy shit, ah! But the thing is, if I want to be analytical about it, I love seeing how violent Ripjaws can be. He's a monster fish alien. He has sharp teeth. He's probably like a predator type alien on his home planet, so seeing him act like one is really cool. Seeing him bite through glass, seeing him tear tentacles apart and all the oil acting as blood, everything about it is so good. The animation, the pacing, the music, the sound effects, like the sound effect when Ben is off screen after biting a cyber squid as if he just like killed a person, that shit is peak to me. I love seeing not only him use his jaws, but also his claws to fight, seeing him slash through the glass, seeing him just kill one after another with no problem, like here he is cornered, and he doesn't give a shit. Honestly, every time I want to try to recommend someone that Ripjaws can at least be cool sometimes, They Lurk Below is easily the scene I think of immediately. His final appearance in season 2 would be in the episode Back with a Vengeance, where he has a short cameo. In that episode, he uses Ripjaws to save an old man who fell in the water at Niagara Falls, and then jumps out, turning into Stinkfly in order to fly back to the boat. Sadly, Ripjaws doesn't really get to do much here because he just jumps in the water and that's it, but at least he was used somewhat. But there's also this really fucking funny frame of Ripjaws here, like look at this shit, oh my god. His next appearance would be in the season 4 episode Divided We Stand, where he once again appears for a small cameo, where he's accidentally terrorizing people at a beach. It's small, it's short, but it's a little fun, even if it's very brief. His next appearance would be in the episode Ben for Good Buddy, where he's used by accident when Ben intends to get Accelerate to fight off the road crew at the beginning of the episode. Ripjaws doesn't really do too much here, he just bites a car for a bit, and then he gets like slingshotted. and then that's about it for that scene. You may have noticed I may have made a bit of an error when talking about Ripjaws' scenes. I mentioned Season 1, 2, and 4, but not Season 3. Well, there's a reason for that. Ripjaws does not appear at all during the 3rd season of the classic series. Even though Ben does try to use him twice in the season, Ripjaws doesn't appear at all, and having an entire season where he doesn't appear really affected his longstay, popularity, and just overall potential because he had no time to shine at all. The only other classic Ripjaws we get is in a short, Sleepaway Camper. There were these Ben 10 shorts that premiered a little bit before Alien Force started, and they were all pretty good for the most part. One of my favorites was Sleepaway Camper, not only because it was a fun little short, but also because it gave Ripjaws screen time, like honest to God screen time. In the short, Ben is having trouble sleeping due to Grandpa Max's snoring. After many failed attempts, Ben decides to use the Omnitrix, intending to go gray matter to sleep in a hole because apparently that doesn't sound uncomfortable or terrifying in the slightest. Ben accidentally gets Ripjaws and decides to sleep at the bottom of a lake. I know many people question, like, first of all, wouldn't Ben time out and then like drown, or Ben would time out and then rise to the top? Like, I get that and everything, but I mean, it's just a fun short, so I couldn't give a shit. Another power we get to see from Ripjaws and later another Pisces Valan is the fact that his angler can glow, which I think is pretty cool. Could you imagine if Ben got a different alien besides Ripjaws? Like, if he got Forearms or Frankenstrike, Gwen would be dead right now. At the very least, in Goodbye and Good Riddance, Ripjaws gets like a short cameo along with most of the aliens Ben has at that point, and you know, he looks neat. I kind of wish it was a real poster. I would totally buy this. Just include the Halloween trio, please, and Eye Guy, and Way Big. Thank you. Now, Ripjaws unfortunately didn't get many scenes to shine. He had some cool moments, he had some silly moments, but that's about it. Overall, not much to go over for the classic series Ripjaws. As for why, we'll get to that in a bit, but for now, let's talk about how Ripjaws was implemented in the future installments, starting of course with Ultimate Alien. Ripjaws and Ultimate Alien is often considered to be the worst design of the 3 Ripjawses, and I do agree with that, but I'm a little less harsh to it than other people. I actually don't mind the catfish-like look for Ripjaws. I don't think it's as good as classic or Omniverse's, but it's not the worst thing in the world. He looks very different when you compare the intro and the actual show, and I think he looks so much better in the intro. I feel like the black lips look so much better than the green lips because, I don't know, it just looks off to me. At least the black I could kinda see working, even if it does look a little bit of Wildmutt in the... Yo, you know what I just realized? Like, his mouth looks more Wildmutt than actual Wildmutt in Ultimate Alien because Wildmutt has like the orange lips that look terrible. I just noticed that. Anyways, as I was saying, Ripjaws in Ultimate Alien is often considered not that good looking, but I actually don't mind his color scheme either. I actually really like the clay color with the olive green. That actually looks really nice to me. What's interesting is that Ripjaws has like a sketch of him in UAF if he had his more classic design, and I really like it. I kind of wish I did this, but again, I don't mind UAF Ripjaws as much as other people do. I don't like it that much, but I don't mind it. Normally I would start talking about who voices Ripjaws in UAF, but unfortunately we never get to see Ripjaws speak, as Ripjaws only has one appearance for a small brief scene in Perplexahedron. The scene has Ben and Kevin in a room filling with water, so Ben uses Ripjaws in order to find a way out so they don't drown to death. On the bright side, we do get to see Ripjaws actually be strong underwater once more, but we never get to see him talk or see what his legs look like, just what his tail looks like. One thing I never noticed about Ripjaws in Ultimate Alien is the fact that he kind of still has like a stripe pattern on his tail, but because it's the same color as his scales, it doesn't look the best. I actually don't mind it either, but it really pales in comparison to classic or Omniverse. The scene itself is okay, but there's really not much to talk about. The last iteration for Ripjaws to appear in the Prime continuity would be in Omniverse. So did Omniverse make up for the lack of screen time that he had in Ultimate Alien and Classic? Well, let's start with his design. As far as his design goes, I see a lot of people often favor the Omniverse Ripjaws because it is a really good redesign. His monstrous proportions, the black claws, the way his teeth have like outlining now, the whole like way his fins are drawn, everything about it is so good. In fact, this has potential to be my favorite Ripjaws. The one thing I like more in Classic is honestly how his face looks, and I feel like that carries so much for why I prefer that design. But Omniverse Ripjaws has so many things I like about it. I love the way his uniform has like these black patches on his shoulders and his arms. That looks really good. I love the bigger hands, I love the longer fins, and I also love that he has fins on the back of his heels. As far as his voice goes, he is voiced by Eric Bauza. He does a pretty good job, though I don't think it's as cool as Fred's performance in the Classic series. It still has a bit of a monster feel, but not nearly as much. While the voice itself is pretty good, I feel like the fact that it's a bit of like a high-pitched voice makes it kind of lesser. I feel like Ripjaws just sounds so good with a deeper voice.
Ha! Who's the best fisherman now?
Sorry, man.
I thought I had one.
However, if there's one thing to praise about Ripjaws and Omniverse in terms of sound design, I love the weird, like, squealing sound effect he does. I don't know what you would call it, but something about it I just love so much. I really wish he did it more. So while it wasn't hard to do, Ripjaws in Omniverse is a big improvement compared to UAF. So let's see if his screen time can also be set for that. Ripjaws' first appearance in Omniverse would be in Season 2 in the episode Gone Fishing. In this episode, he's used twice in the beginning of the episode. The first time he's used, he jumps in the water to try to fish better than Rook, but ends up getting trashed instead. The second time he's used is almost immediately after, where him and Magister Patellidae swim under the water to find fish. I love that they take the opportunity to have Ben and Patellidae swim together as the same species. I love that. Patellidae gets himself captured by robot pirates, and Ben fights him off with Ripjaws for a bit, and I love this fight scene as brief as it is. Something about Ripjaws using his strength to pull in the robot, bash his head with him, and not even be phased is so cool. And then when the robot tries to throw like a rock at him, he swings the robot arm to go into the rock, and he has a corny pun on top of that. I love that.
Rock on!
Despite appearing in Season 2, he wouldn't appear again until Season 7 for his second and final appearance, being in the Ballad of Mr. Bauman. In the episode, he's used at the end to fight off Volcanus underwater so he could help Mr. Bauman save Shelane. The fight scene itself is okay. It's longer than Gone Fishing, but it's not as interesting to me. We do get to see some strength, some bite action, and you know, seeing him create a water vortex with Bauman and Shelane is okay, but nothing super crazy. Ripjaws does make a cameo in A New Dawn, but you know, New Dawn cameos don't really count to me. I just point them out anyway in case anyone wants me to mention them. Despite being one of the original 10, Ripjaws was kind of an afterthought after Classic, and even during the second half of Classic. You could argue the first 2 seasons were fine, but after that, he just almost vanished entirely. So why was Ripjaws just not used at all almost entirely? There are 3 keywords that I like to say when I think of the reasons why Ripjaws had limited appearances. They are limitations, difficulty, and class. Let's start with limitation, as that's the more obvious answer. In terms of limitation, Ripjaws has his weaknesses, as does other aliens. For example, you could put out the fires of Heat Blast, or Diamond Head being very vulnerable to sound-based attacks. However, Ripjaws' limitation is much more common, being outside of water. Ripjaws is a fish alien, and thus, if he's out of the water for too long, he'll have trouble breathing. We see this quite a few times. For example, in The Last Laugh when he's surrounded by fire, when he's climbing Mount Rushmore in Secrets, even in Truth, despite not having to deal with it for too much, he constantly rehydrates himself because he needs to be hydrated. We do not see this flaw in Ultimate Alien or Omniverse, as Ultimate Alien has like almost nothing to go off of, and plus he's under the water for most of the scene anyway, and in Omniverse's case, once again, he's underwater for most of the scenes. The reason why this would limit his screen time is because you would need to write scenes where he's in aquatic environments a lot for him to truly have a lot of his potential be shown. While episodes like The Kraken or They Lurk Below show off that pretty well, not many episodes get to do that. One common thing said about They Lurk Below is that the plot was probably written just to give an excuse for Ripjaws to be used, which I could totally buy. Another keyword I mentioned was difficulty, and simply put, he was a pain in the ass to animate. His designer, Dave Johnson, regretted a lot of things about his final design, particularly the amount of teeth he had with no lips in place and his head shape. Because he was difficult to animate, he got fewer appearances than most of the aliens. As for the third reason, we have class, and this one doesn't sound obvious but will become very obvious in a second. As I mentioned in my previous video, which was about the Electric Ben 10 aliens, there are aliens that share powers with each other, and if aliens have similar abilities but one is clearly better than the other one gets outclassed. Think of it like Fire Emblem if you play that game. You have Ripjaws, who's your Jagan unit. He is strong, he does a lot of cool things, but he won't really do much later down the road. And then you have your Kane or Abel, which you can compare to Amphibian or Jetray, aliens that also have similar abilities and can do what Ripjaws can do, except better, and they have more to offer. Because of this, I see Ripjaws as the blueprint of aquatic aliens, which makes sense. He's one of the original 10, and there were no other aquatic aliens until Alien Force. As far as out of the show material, Ripjaws does have some stuff to talk about. Let's start with the classic series, where of course he has a 4-inch figure like most of the aliens, and he also has a Metamorph figure where he can become a water gun, which is one of my favorite Metamorph figures. I love the articulation and detail on this Ripjaws figure. Ripjaws also has a Hyper Alien figure, which looks okay. I'm not a big fan of how dark he looks compared to the show, and something about his like uniform patch thing looking like wood, not a big fan of that either. I also don't like how fucking dry his head looks. He looks like he hasn't seen a drop of water in years. We got bro really looking like, I don't need it! Ripjaws also has a little sumo slammer figure, and he also has like this little like figurine from I don't know what. I own the gray matter of this, believe it or not, but I don't remember where these came from or when these were a thing, but there's like these little mini Ben 10 figures, and they're all really cute. I like them. Any other type of Ripjaw stuff would be like miscellaneous small stuff, such as like those figures where you could fuse alien body parts together. And there is this really cool like mini figure from the Ultimate Alien era where it has classic Ripjaws. I do like that. And like other classic series aliens, he has a Haywire figure where he switches the color scheme with Accelerate. As far as Flash games go, Ripjaws would appear with the other original 10 aliens in Battle Ready, where he had his own level, swimming in a sewer, and it's okay. He can swim and he has a bite attack, that's pretty neat. He also appears in the Flash game Power Splash along with Stinkfly, and this game is based off the episode The Kraken. In this game, Ripjaws swims under the water, fighting cyber squids from They Lurk Below for some reason, and he also has a bite attack, and it's okay. As far as video games go, Ripjaws is in Ben 10 Hyperscan, and I'm only bringing this up now because I just want to bring more attention to this funny as fuck slap animation. God, I love this animation so much. And that's about it as far as Flash games or merchandise go for Ripjaws. Ripjaws does make appearances in some Ben 10 books, which were short little stories that were not canon to the Prime continuity. Like a majority of the art in these books, they're not the best when it comes to the actual like posing and anatomy and stuff. In fact, I think Ripjaws is one of the lesser looking aliens in this. The only time that Ripjaws appears in anything outside of Omniverse for the Omniverse iteration is in What Lies Beneath, which I already mentioned in my Blitzwolfer video. There was also Omniverse IDW books, and Ripjaws does make an appearance in this. Ripjaws looks pretty good for the most part. I never read these stories, so I don't know if they're actually any good, but all I know is that Ripjaws is in it, it's not canon, and it also involves Serpent from the UAF era. That's about it when it comes to Omniverse Ripjaws representation outside of the show. Ultimate Alien did nothing with him besides his one little cameo in Perplexahedron, so his representation from a quantity perspective is pretty lackluster. But I do want to talk about the missed potential Ripjaws has, with appearances and other types of merchandise he could have had. As far as the classic series go, this might be a hot take, but there is one episode I kind of would have wanted to see him in, and that is the season 4 episode, Big Fat Alien Wedding. In that episode, there's like a scene where Ben goes to a lake at night to swim for a bit, and it would have been really cool if he went as Ripjaws, but I know it wouldn't really be much action, but it would have been kind of neat. Maybe instead of having Cannonball put out the fire, he would use Ripjaws to like have like a really big cannonball and like splash the water. I'm not sure, but something kind of would have been neat for him to have an appearance, you know? As for Ultimate Alien, I can think of a few appearances he could have. The first one being in the the Eunice episode, where in this episode there's like a scene where they go camping, and it would have been really cute and charming to see Ripjaws go in the lake and swim for fish. Imagine him like just popping out a bunch of salmon in his mouth. That'd be kind of neat. In the episode The Mother of All Vritos, there's a beach for the second half of the episode, and because of that, I would have liked to see Ben turn the Ripjaws go under the water and try to destroy the tubes that were actually sucking up the ocean. As for Omniverse, there isn't necessarily too many specific scenes he could be in. I feel like Omniverse is that one series where like you could kind of replace aliens with each other in different scenes and it wouldn't really make much of a difference. But if there is one episode I could point out that I think Ripjaws could have worked in, it is the episode American Benwolf in London. I didn't mention this in either my Blitzwolfer or my Humongousaur video, so I guess now's a better time than any to say it. This episode, maybe I'm gonna come off as childish, has the worst alien pool I've ever fucking seen. And the thing is that there's only 3 aliens used in this episode. Blitzwolfer, who's fine enough because it's his first appearance in Omniverse and his scene's okay. Then you have Forearms used twice, and then Humongousaur, who in Omniverse specifically are both like pretty much the same fucking alien. They do the same things, they're not creatively used almost at all. Like, it sucks. I'm sorry. I'm gonna sound very negative, but it's so boring. The reason why I think this episode would work for Ripjaws is because at the end of the episode, the room with King Arthur's sword begins to flood. And since Humongousaur is used in this episode, maybe the water would begin to slow him down as he's fighting off Chadwick, who's now an alien hybrid. Turning into Ripjaws would give him somewhat of an edge and an environment advantage as he's underwater, and we've seen him be strong as fuck underwater. As far as Ripjaws' scenes go, he has some action, but also not a lot. Some of his scenes could be very underwhelming. But here's something I kind of noticed when rewatching Ripjaws scenes. Honestly, I'm not sure if I'm in the majority or minority for saying this, but I think Ripjaws can be really adorable. That sounds really odd at first, but like look at the way he acts in some of these scenes. It's pretty quirky stuff.
Hey, where's everybody going? Surf's up, dudes. Circus freak. I'm not a circus freak. I'm a superhero. Peace and quiet.
And also, while I didn't mention it, in the episode Framed, Kevin uses Ripjaws and is seen on the newspaper with this very fucking funny shot of him with a generic money bag. That shit's pretty funny. It would have been cool to see 11-year-old Ben use Ripjaws. There were never plans for him to appear, even though he appears in the intro, so even in Omniverse, they were doing like false advertising with the intro, and I know this is a Ripjaws video, but I just have to say it now because I'm Snaro's, like, I'm one of Snaro's biggest fans. Why the fuck is 16-year-old Snaro there and not an 11-year-old design? They didn't even like recolor him or anything. Oh my god, it pisses me off. Oh my god, it makes me crash out. Oh my god. Anyway, as I was saying, Ripjaws appearing in the intro with 11-year-old Ben makes it seem like he was going to appear at some point, but he doesn't. And honestly, that's pretty disappointing because look at the way he's drawn here. He looks incredible, and thankfully we actually could see a full render of this, well, as full as we could get, on the Ben 10 wiki. As far as potential for merch goes, obviously a 4-inch figure for Omniverse would have been cool, but another thing I'm surprised they didn't do, maybe it was difficult to implement or they never thought of it, was having a DNA alien hero figure where Ripjaws' legs can become his tail. Considering that seems like such an obvious thing to do, I'm surprised they didn't ever attempt it, or at the very least have a separate figure that was Ripjaws with his tail. And I don't mean just like one of those mini like statue type figures, I mean like a genuine figure, like an action figure you could play with. My reasonings for enjoying Ripjaws can come down to having cool powers, a few cool scenes, and just a really cool design and likability. I think Ripjaws is charming above everything else. Even if he doesn't do a whole lot, what he does is what I really like. Quality versus quantity. I would have loved to have seen him be used more, but unfortunately that's not the case. Many people will bring up the fact that he should have had a breathing brace of some sort after Classic, and while I can agree from like a survival standpoint it makes sense, this is going to be a hot take. I think that Ripjaws specifically, again, Ripjaws specifically, just looks really fucking stupid with one. I know that's such a dumb opinion, but it's my dumb opinion and I'm proud of it. I just wish that Ripjaws had more time to shine. The thing is, people will often say that, oh well, this alien's more powerful, so this other alien should be disliked or ignored. But the thing is, I feel like every alien, no matter how useful or useless, should be considered valid in some way. I like all the aliens in some way. I don't know, I just don't have it in me to dislike an alien completely. So what do you think of Ripjaws? Do you like Ripjaws? Do you dislike Ripjaws? Did you end up liking him more after seeing some of the points I made? Do you think some of the stuff I mentioned as hypothetical Ripjaws screen time or merch could have helped him be more liked in the fandom? Or are you just forever a Ripjaws hater? I appreciate you guys for stopping by, and as always, happy night hunting.